was a big long road, and there was like 10 cameras here and 10 cameras there, and there was cameras everywhere, and this was like way in the country.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Almost False podcast, where I interview regular people with incredible stories. Today our guest is Kevin from Alberta, Canada. He lived in China for 7 years and has a lot to say about how life actually is in China. And so I can't wait to talk to him. I don't want to waste more of your time, so let's get into the story with Kevin. Okay, so it was easy for you to get there. It wasn't like a hassle to try to find things in Chinese.
No, yeah, it was easy. I got the visa, and then I flew there, and then they actually enrolled me in Chinese lessons almost immediately, which helped a ton.
I was going to say, did you speak any Chinese before going there?
No, zero. Literally zero.
Zero?
Yeah.
So how did that go?
It was okay. Like, once you're there, it's easy enough to pick up. If you get the basics, it's easy. The hardest thing I found was, like, listening, and then to translate in real time. I would always lag, so if someone said like 10 words, I'd get stuck on the fifth, and then I'd miss the last half of the sentence, which was like probably the most important. So the listening aspect was the hardest, but growing vocabulary wasn't totally hard.
How long did it take you to be able to communicate in Chinese? Like, there's a different alphabet. This is a very complicated language, so I'm kind of fascinated. So you learned Chinese, right?
Yeah, I did. So in China, they call it, there's like 6 levels of fluency. There's a test called HSK. So I was I was halfway through 5. But It's like, that sounds good, but I still couldn't even read like children books. There's so many characters, okay. Right? So, but yeah, because it's non-phonetic, each character has like a meaning or similar many meanings. And so once you just get a character, and their longest word is like 6 letters. So, like in English, we have rehabilitation and all these big words. In Chinese, because of the tones, their longest word's 6 letters. So every character is it's like methodical almost, right? So it's not turbo hard.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The Chinese letter is so fascinating to me. You said there's a lot of letters. To be honest, I know nothing about Mandarin, about any of the Asian languages, how it works. So how many characters? Give me like a little bit of an idea.
I think, okay, this is what I heard, but my numbers could be off. The average educated Chinese person, I think they know about, I want to say 6,000 or 7,000 characters. So, but like for me, I think I knew about maybe 4,000. Maybe that was words. It's so hard to gauge, but I knew a lot, but I didn't know enough.
That's interesting.
Okay.
And how? So I asked that earlier, but how long did it take you to be able to talk with them, to understand them? Because you got there cold, not knowing anything.
Yeah. So the first 6 months I was there, I got the basics, and then once you like get your foundation, you just grow the rest. So it took me, I would say, 6 months to get somewhat competent, and then a year to be able to listen pretty good. So I would say for me personally, a year was like pretty sufficient. And then, but that was still like, you're still a rookie, but a year is good.
Yeah. Okay. And I want to go back to the story about the orphanage. What were you doing in the orphanage? What was your role? How were you helping? Give me a little bit of a summary of that.
So the guy was telling me essentially, like, because China's very complicated and they abandon kids for many various reasons. I think a lot of people, they hear that and they give Chinese people like this bad connotation, like, oh, they're all bad. But I think in a lot of cases, like I always give the example, like say you have a baby, and it needs this surgery, but the surgery, it's going to cost you, you're going to have to sell your house and your car and everything just to pay for a surgery. So sometimes they'll give up the baby. Like they just think, oh, if I give it up, it'll have a better life because the government will pay for the surgery and blah, blah, blah. So there's like so many reasons Chinese abandon babies. But the point is, like, all the ones at the orphanage were abandoned and disabled to some degree. Down syndrome, autistic, lots of physically disabled kids and things like that.
And you put that on the kids having disabilities, the parents not being able to take care of them? Or do you think there's a part that's like they don't want any part of like a disabled child? Or
Well, there's the bad luck aspect. So lots of them do believe luck's a big thing over there, right? So they do believe like if you have a disabled kid, your family has bad luck. So there is like that aspect where they are heartless to a degree, and they just view life differently. And I don't think that's like right or wrong. It's just their culture. And I mean, I do think it's not ideal, obviously, but yeah. So because of the bad luck, they'll do that stuff.
I don't know. I never feel like it's a to abandon a child for luck. Like there's some reasons. There's definitely some parents that could abandon a child for the child to have a better life, like the example you gave. And I think that's totally makes sense. If you just don't want it, I feel like there's something wrong about that. But
Yeah,
who am I really?
yeah.
So when you were at the orphanage, was there a pattern that you saw with the kids? Were they struggling because they were orphans, or did they seem to be normal and dealing with it pretty well?
I think because of their like ignorance of reality, they were happy, man. Most of them were all happy. They just didn't know what they were missing, so it's like they were stoked. And once you just befriend them, yeah, they were all quite happy, I found.
And what was your job at the orphanage? What were you doing?
I was the guy who just hung up. So they call them aunties essentially. It's like the workers. Most of them are women. Um, so they were so busy because there's so many kids, they wouldn't have time to actually play with the kids. So that was essentially my job. Take them for walks. We would do like some board games, throw a ball, usual kid stuff essentially.
And you got paid to do that?
No, no, that was volunteer.
Oh, okay. So here's the other question. How did you survive in China for all these years if you were doing volunteer work?
Well, that's eventually why I worked. So the first 6 months, I just had saved up a few grand, and living in China is pretty cheap back then. That was 2010. So my rent was like $150 Canadian. The food was cheap. I don't know. Everything was cheap, right? So, but that was kind of I my excuse to go back. I was like trying to get my visa to go back to the orphanage, but they're like, we won't give you another travel visa. China said this. So I was like, well, how can I go back to China and help the kids, but also have a visa? And the answer to that was work. And so I got a job. I taught English, but then when I had free time, I went back to the orphanage.
That's cool. That's cool. So you taught English to how old were the kids you were teaching?
Oh
Were they
man,
kids or adults?
middle school. So like 12, 13. It was so fun. Yeah.
Did it go well? Were they learning, or because it's a quite a big difference in language?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's funny, like in China, they have this thing, they call them, you're essentially a monkey. So they hire you based on your skin color. I know that sounds bad, but like it's all about having a good reputation in China. So if you can afford a foreign teacher, you get a better reputation. So essentially the school didn't actually care if I taught English. They were like, we just want you to be a white guy. And so when my classes, I only taught the kids one time a week, for 40 minutes. So it was the only class they had the whole week that they could actually like let loose, because I didn't give them tests. Like I didn't give them homework or anything. I just went in, hey guys, like let's learn some vocab and idioms and fun stuff, and then I would leave. So it was actually kind of funny because yeah, the school didn't really care what I taught, but because I have like enough integrity, I actually took it somewhat serious.
That's interesting, and it's fascinating to me. I love cultures, and I love the differences between people. You lived in Canada, obviously, because that's where you live, that's where you're from.
Yeah.
You lived in China for a while, and you taught in China for a while. What's the difference? I'll start with this. What's the difference in the school system and the way that they teach and the culture around it compared to like the North American culture?
I think it's so you know how China had the one child policy for a while, right?
Yes.
So due to that, all the, what do you call it, pressure of getting a good job falls on one kid. And so their education system is like crazy serious. Like my 12-year-old students were doing math. I'd never even seen that math. Like it was calculus and trigonometry, like crazy, crazy. 12, 13 years old. So the difference, and like if the kids were really bad, they would bring them in the office and like hit their hand with a ruler and verbally malign them. Like it was super gnarly. So it's very, everything's different. They're all about like very respect, serious. You can't goof off. Like you need good grades. If you get bad grades, they post them on the school. And so if you're at the bottom of the list, that whole reputation thing I was saying, they call it mianza, which is like face. If you lose your face, like reputation, bottom of the barrel grades, you're like a disgrace, right? So no kid wants that. So they all work extra hard to not be at the bottom. So it's all this weird psychology stuff. And obviously in Canada, it's like you can skip school, and yeah, it's pretty lackadaisical here, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the system here is perfect, not even close to it. I don't like it a lot, but that's besides the point.
Yeah.
In China, what you just talked about, they're very strict and they really want good grades, and they go to the point of humiliating the kids if they don't have it. To one degree, that must help kids to learn because it's forced motivation. But did you see a different side of it, a dark side of it, where it had some really bad repercussions on some people?
Yeah, like so in China they have a thing called Gaokao, and it's essentially the high school exam to get you into university, which like dictates the rest of your life. So you study in school to grade 11. Grade 12 is 100% review. So they don't even learn things in grade 12, which is crazy. And then, so grade 12, they do the Gaokao. And if they get a bad grade, I've heard a lot of kids will kill themselves just because it's so much pressure. Like my buddy's students that were 14, they had gray hair because of stress. Like 14 years old, like for serious, they had gray hairs, not full head, but like, so, yeah, the suicide thing's the main thing. If you do bad on that and you get in a bad university, it's like your life's basically over, which I think is really obviously damaging. So,
well, that's horrible because these are kids, like 14-year-old. You're still a kid. You don't really understand how life works, and to have your whole life being dictated by the results you get on one test is kind of so much pressure. It can't be healthy at all. Even if you pass the test, even if you get it, like I have a psychology background. This can't be good. This can't be good. Obviously the system that we have here is a little bit too lax, but at the other extreme, it might even be worse. Like I'd rather have someone that doesn't care about school and is not a good citizen, doesn't do much, than someone who kills themselves,
Yeah, you got to find the balance. I think the West doesn't really do it super correct. Like you say, it's too lax, but then the East or China does it too hard. So yeah, it's tricky, man. It was sad to see, but then like, obviously because my class was their only free time, essentially, they loved me. So I had a ton of fun.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
And knowing both North America and Canada and China, what would you say would be the happy medium? Like if you had to give us an example of what you think would be a good school system that would take the best of both worlds, what would you say?
For me too, growing up, like my parents didn't pressure me much. I think it's not like pressure. I think it's just a slight more nudge, like to try. I don't know. It's hard to explain. Like, I don't know. I just think like kids have more, what's the word, potential, but they're not pushed hard enough here. So it'd just be like, just push them a little hard.
Fair enough. Yeah. To make them try their hardest instead of just doing the bare minimum, but not to the point of like pushing them so hard that it has psychological repercussions in the future.
Yeah, like,
or in the present.
Yeah. I think kids now too, there's not like many consequences. Like lots of kids just play video games. But there's not much, like parents don't care. I don't know. It's a whole nother conversation, I think,
Yeah. So another part of the culture, just in general, the culture with like people over there, what's the biggest difference that you saw between North Americans and Chinese people?
I feel like they were happier, which sounds counterintuitive, just given how hard they work in school. But just as like my experience with them, maybe it was because I was a foreigner too, so it might be slightly biased, but they're such genuine, nice people. It's so crazy. Yeah, just I really felt like they were my people. Like I'm basically Chinese in a white body. I'm one of those. What do they call them? A banana? No, the inverse of a banana, an egg. But no, I love the Chinese. Like they're so friendly and giving. Yeah, like the road rage. Like they drive crazy. It's a whole story, which is they never crash. They drive crazy, but they never had much road rage, right? And I just thought, like, you guys are in traffic jams. You got a guy turning here and here and here, but nobody's really mad. They kind of just float through life. It's kind of cool, I think.
That's cool to hear because we always hear negative things about China and about Chinese people and how horrible it is. And it's good to have, it's refreshing to have some good things because obviously there can be only bad in certain societies and in people. There's good things about everyone.
Oh yeah.
And so I love to hear what you just said.
Yeah. Like I felt safe all the time there too. So it felt safe, but it also was safe because like if you're a criminal, they basically just kill you. So it's not like my buddy was like, we were driving. He's like, yeah, if you deal drugs, that's where they bring you to kill you. Like they don't mess around. So people who commit crimes, not all of them die, but the repercussions are so drastic. What's the word? Like they don't even attempt to break the law, right? They're pretty straight shooters. So it's kind of like, I think that's good, right?
Interesting.
But that's just me.
Interesting. I don't know what to think about that. I don't know what to think. But where were you? What city was it? Were you in a big city?
I was started in Changsha. It was like 7 million, which is pretty big. And then I went to a different one. It was called Huangshi, but it was an hour south of Wuhan, which is now infamous. And then I went to Guiyang, which is kind of southwestish.
We hear a lot of negative things with the surveillance and all that stuff. Did you experience that when you were over there?
Well, I left in 2018. It wasn't super bad then. They've upped it since then a little. But from my experience with surveillance, it's one of those false security things, right? So there's more cameras so people don't commit crimes as much. But then your private stuff is more out there. So but I didn't notice it much. I noticed like even on crappy transit buses, there'd be like 5 or 6 cameras. Like there's cameras everywhere, but it wasn't impeding on my life, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've heard about other Chinese people or people that have went to China a little bit, and they kind of say the same thing. They echo the same sentiment of, yes, there is, or it's not as bad as what it seems, as what we make it seem to be in the West. I've never been, so I don't know, but it's interesting to hear from people that have been there.
Yeah. It's actually crazy. Here's a crazy story though. My friend went, so China kind of looks like a chicken. And if you go to the tail section, Xinjiang is like way, way out in the country. Like I'm talking, it's like northern Canada. There's nothing around. She sent me a picture and it was a big long road. And there was like 10 cameras here and 10 cameras there. And there was cameras everywhere. And this was like way in the country. So there's a lot of cameras.
Wow. And so your whole experience about China, what did you get out of it? I imagine you came back to Canada a different person. You learned a lot of things. What was the biggest takeaway of your stay over there?
I think it's just like people are always people. I think it's easy to like when you don't know a culture, you've never traveled. This might sound condescending, but like if you've never traveled, you kind of have a different paradigm where you view other cultures. And so once you're in it, and you understand like, they're still just people. They just speak a different language and eat weird food and whatever. But yeah, I think living there was such an eye opener. It's just like, the way I viewed humanity was, I want to say expanded, but more like empathetic, I guess.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Almost False podcast. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more interviews like this. If you found this content valuable, please share it with a friend. It really helps us out a lot, and hopefully it will help them too. If you want to be on the show, you can go to almostfalse.net and submit your story there. We would love to hear from you. With that being said, I hope you have a great rest of your day and stay blessed.